welcome to Rock Creation Techniques 2. We're going to get straight into it. We're going to create a new substance. We're going to use this database setup that is included in your download. I'm just going to call this one RCT2. Relative to parent and 2048, 2048, and relative to parent. So this is just my base setup file where we pipe all the shapes in through this background on this blend node, and we get our AO and normal set up already. So for this tutorial, we're going to go into some techniques how to add details to our rocks that we started building in the first rock creation techniques. And for those of you that didn't participate in that, we're going to use this file that I've also supplied, which goes through all the examples we built, and it's just a couple of different rocks in here. So I think we're going to start with this one. So we can just start by hooking this up here, and we'll see our little preview down here. We can crank up our AO strength a little bit. Yeah, something like that. And let's just start moving this off to the side. You don't have to use this. If you were part of Rock Creation Techniques 1, you could use that rock, or if you have your own little creation, you can use that as a start instead. The only thing is that you need like a little bit of detail or a little bit of shaping, so the detailing can have something to work with. So the first thing I want to do here is just create like a little bit of secondary detail. We have these really strong shapes in here, but we want to do something that adds to this shape and complements it. So we're going to start with shadows node. And we're going to put 8. 200. And this, yeah, this will be 0.5. Let's soften it up a bit. Then max out the samples. I'm going to run this into a quantize node. So what the quantize node is doing, it's clamping out the range, and you define how many bands you want. So if I set this to 15, now based on this input, we get 15 steps here, or actually based on the full range. So actually we can count the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We get 6 in here, but if we, oh yeah, here we see the full range. And we run this into edge detect, because we want to capture what these bands are doing and add that as some little bit of sort of cracking. Let's do 0.4. And we're going to run a bevel through this. And the bevel we can set to 0.1. So what we get here is we can actually blend this on our shape. We'll put multiply on here, and we set this to 0.35 or something. Yeah, now we get a little complement shape. The nice thing about this shadow node, which is essentially it takes this height and it calculates shadow based on this light angle. So if I move this around here, we now move our cracking around essentially. And that seems to complement them nicely. So I have a node that will be available to those who have access to this tutorial, and it's on also my Gumroad. It's called Dette Directional Warp. So we just drag and drop this from your folder in Windows in here. We'll hook this up to height, and we'll add a clouds 2 node here. Just default settings. We're going to start just breaking these guys up. And this one also has a direction. Let's do something like 120. Let's crank up the intensity a bit as well. And this one has, this one is essentially a directional warp from multiple directions. So here we only have one vector, one direction, and here we have 3. So we can hook this up here. Now it's just starting to do something that offsets from the shape, so it's reminiscent of the base shape, but it goes a little bit off, which is always good. We're going to do yet another step here, where we're going to put a slope blur as well. And let's see, we will crank this up to max, set this to 0.5, set this to min. And we want to use the same detail here. So if you zoom in here, so this is what we had, and now we have a bit more layering. Although this is too much noise at this point, so what we can do is we can take the same noise that we had before. We could blur it here, but a cheaper trick that gives you a little bit better performance is to dump in something like a simple node, like a safe transform, and I'm actually going to set this scale of this node back. So you see, like, this base node here is a 2048, and setting this safe transform back to -2 up here gives us a 512, which gives us a little bit blurrier output from that node. And now we get chunkier shapes. If you see the difference up here, which is essentially the same thing as blurring. So moving on here, we will create a little bit more of a shape detail. We can start by grouping this. So if you select all these nodes and hit add frame, now we have this group that we can organize this. We can call this secondary detail. We can move this whole chunk away. And so now we have some nice, like, semi-cracking detail in the depths of our shapes. I need something more to break up these flat areas, so we're going to add a cells node here. Cells 1, which has these really plush type cell pattern. I'm going to set this to 12 to just to scale. Put a directional warp in here. And this is going to get warped by our main shape. So let's crank up our intensity to a lot, 60. Let's do maybe a 15. Like, keep it on an angle that uses the same angle as our cliff direction here. We can do another blend here, and this we're going to set to subtract. Oops, I'm going to put a foreground like that. We don't want to do this much, obviously, so we want to set this back to maybe 0.1. You see, it starts messing with some of these tops a little bit here. But one problem that's occurring here now, you see the levels here. We have this dark spot here, and as we're subtracting stuff, like, this dark spot is getting darker and darker. So we have to be wary of that. We never want to go full white or full black, because that essentially is no value at all. So we will set a histogram range in here and set this to 1. We can leave this at maybe a 0.6. Then we can crank up this one a bit more. And you see here it creates these kind of like layered cuts on here. There's a really key lesson in here whenever you do any type of detail layering, is that we always want to warp our new shapes that are coming in. If it's you know, a cells pattern, or if you're blending anything on top here, we want to warp it based on the main shape, so it never looks like superimposed on top. Like now actually the cell pattern is modified to flow with the shapes of our rock, and you'll see we're going to do that over and over and over in this tutorial. So let's call this, let's move this off a bit, keep it nice and tidy. We can call this additional shape detail. So now when we have a little more information to work with here, we're gonna do a warping stage here. We're gonna use this node, and actually the exact same type of noise. So if we want to make this connection go here without losing this connection, we can hold shift and drag this one here, and it will rewire it back. A pretty useful tip. And you see now when we have a little more to work with, we get a pretty cool result here. We should adjust the direction a little bit on this, and I think it's a little bit heavy on the displacement here. 3 vectors. We can actually step through and see what. V2. And I'm setting the angle for this so it's distorting more along, you know, if it flows with this direction, counter the shaping of our base shapes, which has you know, this type of direction. So we want to go counter there. We can put a little framer on this guy as well, and call this base distortion, or base warping maybe. Move this noise up here, since it's a kind of global noise we're using, and I want to keep it neat, so I hold I hold shift and alt and click, and we can move these guys around. Move this out of the way a bit more. See, right away we're starting to make something that looks a little more natural, like rocks. You know, if we take out any of these steps so far, you know, we're kind of back to something more generic and less realistic looking. And at any point, you know, once you might be done with this tutorial, you can go in and, you know, we can change the light angle, for instance, to move some of this detailing around. You can change the amount of steps, and the warping, and even these patterns. But let's continue here. Obviously we're making rocks now, so cracking is an essential element, so we should add some cracks on here as well. So I'm gonna build just a new simple crack generator up here. I'm gonna start with the tile random. Obviously, if you have your own utility nodes with cracks, you can use those, but it's always good to get a refresher how to rebuild these. So let's set this to something 8 and 5. Let's go to scale, a little bit smaller. Scale random. We can set that to 0.5 as well, just so we get a little offset on here. Let's do a rotation random as well. Let's keep all these at 0.5, I guess. Offset, yeah, we can do a full offset. Offset random 0.5, and random will start pushing stuff off in all directions, so we want to be a little bit careful. Let's keep it at 0.5 as well. And the last part we need is the color random. We're gonna just use the distance node here. Hook it up to both. Click this only source and do a 500 or something. So now we get, since these have random rotations, we now get a little bit warpy patterns here. That's a good base for our cracks. Then we do an edge detect. I think we're gonna, this kind of roundness looks really cartoony, so we're gonna take that out. Just we're going for something slightly more realistic. Set this to 1. We'll do a little blur pass on this guy. And the blur we set to maybe 0.4, and I always tend to set this one to quality to 1. Blend this back in. Set this to 0.1 maybe, just so we get the core of it is darker, because that's where the crack is the deepest, and then it falls off a little bit smoothly. We can tighten this up with a histogram scan just a little bit. 0.6 just to make it a little bit darker. A little bit tighter like that. And then we'll use a slope, blur, grayscale. I'm going to set this one to 32, and we're going to actually use the same detail as we used before. We used this this lower res 512 version of our cloud noise. That looks absolutely crazy, but it's because we have the wrong modes in here. So we're going to set this one to min, which takes all the dark values and pulls those out. We're going to dial in our intensity here to maybe something like 2, just so we get a little bit of interesting pattern going. Maybe 2 was too much. Unintended. Okay, so here we have a nice base setup of a crack pattern. Gonna add a frame. Call this crack pattern. And this, now we're gonna blend on top of our shape. So I'm going to get back to what we did before, where we start with this, and we can delete this incoming connection. We use our directional warp node here again, but we're going to, let's see, we're going to put this guy in the intensity and then the cracks in the input. Let's move this one back. Let's keep it neat and readable. Somewhere around there. This is a good program if you have OCD, so which I do in certain cases. So here we will just crank up our, let's see, we'll do this one. Yeah, 160 might be good. 155. To make it flow over our shapes again. We'll try 25. And then we'll do 3 just to make it warp in more directions. We're going to blend this on top. Let's see if we can find a good angle. set this one to multiply, and that's way too intense, so we're going to take our opacity down to 0.1. And here we can play around with our direction. What you see now is cracks go over the surface. If I didn't have this one at all, if we set this one back to 0, you see how it looks like someone just stamped the crack over top of the shape. But if we crank it up to 15, you see here this crack is actually like flowing over here and going down based on this shape. And we can do a bit more. If we do too much warping, we can sometimes see that we lose detail. So we shouldn't go too crazy here. But this is more to taste essentially, and what you're going for. This looks pretty cool to me. We can obviously go back to our tile random here and mess with our amount. You know, you want bigger cracks across the surface. Some of these might be a little too intense. We can lower this even more, maybe maybe that looks a little bit better. Let's do a safe transform. So let's add another layer of cracks actually. We can take these as they are, and we can take these and we'll tile them twice, or you can do a 45-degree rotation, which is almost like a 1.5, because this safe transform node is the only one that works with tiling with rotations, but you can only do 90-degree, or you can do 45, but you can only do full tile steps. So if you're using the regular transform 2D node and rotate it off this way, if I press space here to view the tiling, you can see now that we actually break the tiling across. You see this red border. So I would recommend always using, if you use this regular transform node, to only use it in this sense, where you just move and offset without scaling. If you work with tiling textures, if you work with other stuff that doesn't require tiling, like this node is free for all, you could just scale and do whatever. So I always recommend using this. We can go back here and hit space. So we'll try 45, which is roughly then twice or 1.5 as much. And we can run this through levels now just to make it a little bit darker. And you can obviously manipulate here, but sometimes I like going in here to get the numeric values. So we do 0 and 1, and we just crank up this one to 0.65. And we're going to clone this like so, and we do our shift and drag and hook it up there. And then we'll do this on top of here. Let's actually do 2, because I want this to be a finer cracking. But as before, we're gonna use our directional warp node again, just to make sure we're warping this based on our shapes. And we can do a little bit offset direction to just get a different look. Obviously this looks a little bit intense right now, but so something I use a lot is just create a mask here, so we can hook this one up as a mask, so which means we're only going to get these cracks at the peaks, but actually we can control this by adding a histogram. Type HIS, histogram scan, And if we set both of these to something like 0.5, we essentially remove these cracks from the bottom of the shape, and just on these tops here. Still too intense, so I want to take this down even further. This should be like a even smaller level crack pattern here, so we should just make sure it shows up a little bit less. So you see it's starting to layer stuff. It makes it look slightly more realistic as we go. Actually, this one is still intense too. Yeah, something like that. And we will clean up our network here again. Beautiful. And we'll frame this and call this cracking. Yeah, so far we have a bunch of details on here. I'm going to show you a trick that I use quite a lot. Let's grab these guys and move them off again so we have a little more space. We'll add a directional, let's just select this line and type dr. Put this directional warp. So yeah, we have a lot of these crack patterns and detail layers on here now, and we have a really uniform shape that goes through it. So sometimes I want to just break that monotony that's going on, and that all the shapes relate to each other so much. And you know, like rocks have been formed for thousands and thousands of years, and they've been cracking and grinding on each other, and there's pressure above that's like messing with how the whole cliff face is put together. So to simulate some of that is we can take one of these gradient linear, and you saw I flipped it here 90 degrees because the default is just straight this way. And if we set these to be just flat like this, and we take a midpoint in here. So if I set the warp angle of this node to up or down, and we can set this one to, yeah, maybe something like 30 or something. So we're starting to, if you look here in the 2D view up here, we can start like introducing some sagging. We can mess with this curve to just introduce a little bit more like a natural play in the rock itself. We need to be careful here though. We don't want too sharp of details, because it's going to introduce tearing. So if I give you an example where I make it really sharp like this, then suddenly we have this really weird cut through here, and that's what we don't want. But we can do stuff to soften that up, or if you add a couple of stair steppings this way, we can always go in here and put a blur node to control that. Yeah, we'll set this to, Jesus, 10. And then we can mess with this if we want to do 60. This is a really good trick that I use quite a lot. Just introduces more, just makes it more natural essentially. So let's group this and call this something like shape distortion. Let's clean this up a bit and save your work. So we've done a bunch of small cracking and layering. Let's introduce a little bit of pitting in the rock here. So we'll use black and white spots. I like the black and white spots 1 the best. Don't ask me why. We'll use a high pass. So essentially we have so much contrast in here, so I want a uniform level of pitting. So essentially what I will do here, I'll show you a little bit beforehand here. So what I want to do here is just crank up the levels to isolate some of these dots, but since this one has too much macro noise built in, you see this whole dark pattern here and these eyeballs up here. It doesn't work well, so that's why we do a high pass to remove all that small detail. And we can set this one to 8. And then now if we run it through these levels, now we have a uniform pattern without the macro shapes. So I want to set it something like this. We can actually go into numeric panel in here. 0.5. That looks good for a start. And we'll use our directional warp node again. And we'll use the most recent version of our cliff. Set this one to 30. And we can use 1 vector on this just so they don't get super crazy in terms of distortion. And we'll do a blend here. And these guys will subtract. And we'll want to do something really low here, as you see. Looks pretty good. A little bit intense still. Can do it even lower. So now we have like this uniform pitting pattern, but it's still too much, so we can use this trick again where we just use our opacity. So imagine this is maybe this is caused by acid rain or something, but it's not hitting these deeper crevices of the rock, it's just hitting the tips here. It still might be a little too much, so we can go back here and adjust our levels to get something to our liking. We can even do if we do a blend here, we can do our safe transform trick again. So essentially I want to get a little bit blurrier details here, but I also want to keep these sharp shapes around. So let's set this to 0.5, and on our safe transform we're just setting this back to maybe as far as -3, which yields a 256 texture. You see how blurry that looks, and when it's combined. So this is what we had, and now we have, you know, something a little more blurry. Yeah, like that. A little more aged look. And now maybe we need to crank this up a little bit more. Essentially what we got is like a sharp cut in the center and then a blurrier pit essentially around that, which looks more natural. Let's make this neat again. So we'll frame this. I'm going to call this pitting. So let's add a few more small detail layers. So we'll go back to our shadow node. Actually, we can just, you could just use quantize directly from your base shape, but it's kind of like it's too on the nose, and there's no way of controlling it without modifying your main shape. That's why I like to use the shadow node in between. So let's set this to 2. Just have it straight this time. Crank up the samples to 16. And we can add some contrast to this using the histogram scan. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Yeah, same here again. We could just, we can mess with this. And if we would do, yeah, even that, or just straight, like there's no way to change this pattern and to tweak it to our liking. So let's blend this in here. If we put this on the top, we retain this 16-bit, which is what we're building now. This node always forces everything to 8-bit, so make sure you put it in the top of your blend node. And you see here it adds these small layers in here, but they're all super binary, so we want to blur these. So let's put a blur node, and we'll set this to 0.1 and 1. But you see, since this quantize node is the parent of this node, this output also goes into an 8-bit mode, which causes this stair stepping. So we can actually correct that here by setting that to force that to 16-bit. Just want a little bit hint of it on the edge. Maybe a 0.15 or so. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit less. And then when we blend it in here, we can lower it. Immediately adds a little more interest here, but we will actually throw in one more of these guys. So we'll use this as the intensity input, and we'll shove this guy in here, and we'll set this one to, let's plug it in first. The cool thing about this is it's doing the same thing, but now we're actually like offsetting it slightly, which means it's less just drawing the height curves on the shapes. It's, maybe one time back in geological history it was using the base height, but since it's been warping and wind eroded, like these cracks don't, or these layers don't line up exactly with what's going on right now. So we'll see what that looks like. We'll offset this a bit, see if we can get something that looks a bit more interesting. Yeah, that looks pretty cool how it comes in. But it flows over this ridge instead of just like this. It's just drawing it straight. This is way more interesting. And same with this, you could, you can play around with different masking techniques to see like where you want this detail to be. I think for now, just want this to be on wherever. And still we can go back and play with this to get a different look. I can soften it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's see if we want to soften that a bit more, maybe. Yeah, it looks good. So we will group this and let's call this layering. We'll yet again make a little more space here. Let's move this off. So we'll look at, you know, when you go through a graph like this, when you layer on and cake on more detail and you subtract and whatever you do, you can get more and more dark spots that get darker and darker. And obviously we can always use our histogram range to compact the range so we can add and subtract more stuff on top. But I want to show you a different trick that I use, which is this, let's see, height blend node. And if you use a safe transform node, we can do, if we connect them this way, so obviously now we're using the same detail and blended on top of each other, but if we start offsetting this, we can start filling in detail that we already have created in the gaps. So if we double click here and look at this old one, and then this is the new one where we're now starting to fill in some of these gaps, but with the height offset set to 0.5, all the new detail is going to come in at this exact same height, so we're going to get a very noisy composition. So what you can do here is you start pushing back this new detail that we introduced back in these holes here. So we can set this to something 0.7 here. So now if I move that one back, and we can see what these guys are doing. Yeah, essentially we get these little chunks back in these pits, and they have all the details. Since we're just using the same shapes, they have all the details that we've been generating from the beginning of the graph. And this node has 2 sliders here. So usually I use contrast just to crank it up to maximum, and you get these really sharp transitions. You see, yeah, this transition in here, but we can actually use this opacity, or the contrast slider, sorry, to introduce a little bit of fading detail between. So if we set this one to, yeah, maybe not that low, but if we get it to something like that, you see how it kind of introduces this little lip around it here, which is kind of nice. So that's a good trick to add some detail back in. Well, let's just leave this at 0.8 like that, and we can mess with the transform. And I'm mostly looking up here in the 2D view up here to see that I actually get details in these darkest cavities up here. Because a texture like this, if you have this on a huge cliff face or something in a game, this cavity here might start repeating a lot. So that's why we're doing this, essentially getting filling in some detail where we lost it before, essentially. We can group this too and call this eliminate dark spots. And with the option on this node, obviously you can go in and tile this detail, so you get, you know, extra level of higher frequency noise in these pits. I wouldn't recommend doing anything like rotation here, because, you know, with this texture, which is quite directional, this starts looking really weird really fast. You see this kind of stuff now, it's like doing the opposite of what your main shape is doing. Like something like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe a little more this way. Yeah, it takes a little bit of dialing in. So let's look at a couple of tricks we could use to reshape our texture here, or our height information rather. So we already established, you know, our base shapes, you know, super early on back here, but it's not too late to go in and change this shape. And what I mean by that is we could use the curve node. So we can change this fall off from a linear fall off based on our height input here to maybe, like, you know, inflate it a bit. Or you can, you know, make it drop off in certain areas to create, essentially to carve the rock a bit. Maybe this is not what we're going for in this specific case, but you can do a lot at this stage already, even if we have like all this detail on here, and it's actually quite interesting to play around with. We can do stuff where this even starts, you know, bulging up for some reason. This is just a trick I wanted to show you. We can erase that, but play around with this and see the capabilities. It's cool for, you know, like getting more use out of the texture that you already have. And you can make it look, you know, alien or whatever, like, you know, some weird type of erosion pattern on it. You can introduce a couple of more of these stair step layers. You know, suddenly here we have something that doesn't resemble anything we did before, but still being interesting. You can also use this the classical gradient map tool. We should just make sure we set it to grayscale, and then we'll do this shift. We could use the gradient map tool to create these kind of stair stepping effects. That's how I usually use it. So either you can do something like where you go in and pick a gradient, and yeah, we can essentially pick our own gradient here. This can introduce some kind of secondary noise that either you blend in, you know, just like this, you blend in some of this weird noise on top, like so, or we can, if we clear all here, click again. If we want to create stair stepping noise on a bigger scale than we had before, you can, if you add 2 points like this and you start just pushing 1 point closer to the other, we add like this kind of manual quantization. You can do stuff like this as well, where you add 3 points and we add a pit in between the two. Yeah, there's loads of interesting ways to reshape, but I think for me the most common way I use it is exactly like this. I create a couple of points across like this, a couple of secondary points to go with those, and then just like start adding a few layers. Pretty interesting. You can keep it like this, and if you want to fade out this detail, you can add a blend node and just hook your original shape up before, and then you can play around with how much that effect is visible. Leave it on for a little bit, just half, and we can call this reshaping. Essentially, like, this is really good to create stair stepping, and the curve node is really good at doing inflation or erosion type effects, since it's a curve, right? So we can manipulate stuff in a curved manner, which is really hard to replicate using this node, because there's no way to define a curve here if you don't have a bunch of different values in here. Yeah, so it's starting to look pretty cool here. We now have like cracking and pitting and layering at various stages. With all this noise, we can actually look at our normal map here. If you double click on a normal, starting to look pretty cool. I think for me that it's always easier to look at a normal map to see the shapes correctly. But I'm a little bit worried that we have too much noise in here, so I've created this node. It's a low pass node, so I'm going to throw that in here, and it's available for you guys that purchase this tutorial for free. If we hook that up, you saw how it softened it there. So if you let's actually look at our normal and see what it's doing. So this is without it, and this is with it. And what the node is doing is it's evening out some of the noise. So we can say how many steps we want it, and for something like this I would just do the full 4 steps. You see how everything feels just softer, and it's going to eliminate a lot of tearing and stuff. If you let's say you try to render this in Marmoset or something like that and put displacement and tessellation, it's going to eliminate tearing in small areas, like these cracks and where you have a bunch of noise. And you can tweak the amount here. I think for something like this I would just go full. I also have this fade parameter here where we can essentially just fade out what it's doing back to nothing essentially. For something like this, we're going to keep this full on here. Also gives it that aged look, where like more wind eroded look, So like this is really sharp and crisp and everything, but here with this, like all the years of battering of rain and wind has worn it down. So let's put a frame on this. We just call this the height noise, and if we can spell, that helps. Perfect. I think after this stage is where I would go into adding some micro noise or detailing on here. So let's add a fractal sum base. This is sort of my go-to noise for this type of stuff. Let's also add a slope blur here. So I'm not going to warp this based on the shape. I'm going to use this sloper node instead. So we're going to move this up to 32. And we're going to put this, yeah, maybe even higher than 15. Well, let's start here. We'll blend this on. Put this to overlay. That looks pretty cool. I'm gonna blend this one back with the noise just to get a little bit of that micro noise like this. So if we want to get this at maybe 30% or something. So we get a little bit of both. We get this directional type noise, but at the same time we get some of this pitting noise. Or fine noise, whatever we want to call it. Dial it in. So overlay, for those of you who are not familiar with that blend mode, it only works on the grayscale stuff. So if you have black or white pixels in here, it's not doing anything. So it's only affecting stuff in the grayscale spectrum. We can go back to our normal here and check. Yeah, it looks pretty good and rock-like. And the last thing we'll do here is just group this or frame this, and we'll call this detailing. Everything nicely grouped. I showed you guys a couple of different ways of adding details. Hopefully it was useful. Play around with these. Play around with this graph and change the different settings to get a different result. You know, play around with the cracks, add more or less, and you know, more or less pitting, maybe a different kind of pitting, maybe some, you know, leakage or stuff on here, erosion. In this base node that we started with, I also included the other examples from the Raw Creation Techniques 1. So we can actually step through these and see what they look like with this graph. And you can actually go back and, you know, change this accordingly, so like it creates a appealing final composition here as well. Obviously now, since we've been working on this fourth example, it's geared towards working well with that, but it should work with any of these. But maybe some values are slightly off, but it looks pretty cool with most of these. Yeah, for something like this, we might want to go in and change to fix some of these sloping areas, for instance. And this was the initial like pillowy rock that we had. Yeah, it looks pretty cool as well. And let me end with looking at the final render. This is just a marmoset, so this is what we built today. Just put some jazzy lights on this guy. But you can really see these this layering on the edge where, you know, we have controls for that. You can move that and shift that around. Cracking goes across the surface here. It looks pretty good. Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed, and see you in the next one.